Da. Okay, so I think we will start, and as people will be coming into the room, because we are already a few minutes late, and we have to close sharp at 1:30 to make enough time for the closing ceremony, which will include not only Honorable Sonja, but also the President of Srdan. So, my name is Milan Nic. I'm a Slovak working at the German Council on Foreign Relations, in Belgrade. And I have the honor and pleasure to be the chair of the last plenary session of this year's Plenary Security Forum. The title of our session is very nice, common feature of the European Union and the Western Balkans, and how can we move towards it. But before I will introduce you the speakers, let me make one housekeeping remark. As you can see, this is all my pen, which is not okay. And the only thing I can do about it to compensate is to promise that when we open floor for questions from audience, that I will take first questions from female participants, if there is interest. Okay? So, now the speakers in this panel are, starting from the other end, Andrej Logar, State Secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Slovenia, and previously permanent representative of his country to the UN in New York. Then Countryman, who until recently was Undersecretary at the US State Department for Arms Control and International Security, and then he thereafter retired after 35 years of distinguished career at the US Military Service, which included also a period where he was Deputy Assistant Secretary for Europe, so having a job that OED now has, and that included responsibility for the Western Balkans. Then Goran Svilanovic, Secretary General of the Regional Cooperation Council based in Sarajevo, a job that he has had since 2013. Before that, he was also Foreign Minister of Yugoslavia, later Serbia Montenegro, for 4 years from 2000 to 2004. Next to him is Franco Frattini, who served twice as an Italian Foreign Minister, and he was also Vice President of the European Commission. Next to him, Othon Anastasakis is the Director of the Southeast European Studies at Oxford and a Fellow at the St. Antony's College. And last but not least is Srdan, Senior Policy Analyst on the External Relations and the Open Society Foundation in Brussels. They are, if you want to read more about their distinguished professional careers, consult the Othon booklet. We start this panel with you, State Secretary Logar. And let me kick it off with two speeches that were delivered recently on the future of the EU at the horizon of 2024-2025 by President of the European Commission, Juncker, in his State of the Union speech, where he mentioned the enlargement of the Western Balkans, perhaps trying to correct the omission of the Western Balkans in the white paper of the Commission with 5 scenarios in spring, or his disastrous speech to the Parliament, to the European Parliament when he took over the presidency of the Commission in 2015. And he said that yes, there will be no enlargement in the mandate of my Commission, but thereafter, he also said the reason is that the candidates are not ready, but thereafter there will be more members of the EU than 27. After him, new President of France, Emmanuel Macron, gave a speech on the future of Europe and so on. And he also mentioned that Europe should be open towards expansion to the Western Balkans. So what do you make out of it, of these two speeches? Are they in any way a game changer?
In the statement, especially when you speak about statements by the politicians, it's a matter of interpretation. And definitely we go off all the interpretation as probably in many other countries. So it's really a matter of interpretation how we see this statement. If you ask us in Slovenia, I must tell you that the statement of President European Commission was a positive one, especially not questioning the enlargement perspective of the countries of the Western Balkans. He mentioned Serbia and Montenegro, he mentioned the time frame, 2025. Definitely we would have liked more from the statement. But let's keep the momentum from the statement and try to do whatever is necessary, both in the institutions of the European Union and on the side of the candidate countries. I would also like to mention and emphasize the fact that this is the Commission's report. Juncker is President of the European Commission and not member states. Very often the position of member states and Commission differ. And I think that Franco, who was foreign minister, presenting Italy, and then being the vice president of the Commission, knows exactly what is the dynamic in preparing of the statement of the European Commission. So again, I'm going back, it's a matter of perspective, and I believe that this statement was, at least for us, positive, paving the way for the enlargement, but not only for Montenegro and Serbia, but also for other countries from the Western Balkans. Again, Slovenia would like to see Macedonia and Albania joining Montenegro and Serbia in negotiations as soon as possible. Was this a game changer? Was this a game changer? I don't think so. At least not game changer for Slovenia, because we believe in enlargement. We are friends of enlargement. And we believe in Slovenia that enlargement should be done sooner than better. That's our position. So I cannot say that this is the game changer. But I would also like to
briefly on President Macron.
Well, the same, applies the same. Depends on the interpretation. It's a positive one, opens the perspective, was more positive than the previous statements by the French government. So again, more or less on the same line. But I would like to stress another thing. Regardless of the interpretation of the statement, I think it's up to the candidate countries not to use the alibi of different statements for not doing what is necessary to become member of the European Union. And I will give you the example of Slovenia. We started negotiations in the 90s, and we did undergo major political economic reforms. We didn't change the constitution. But whatever we did at the time, we did not do because of the European Union, but because of ourselves. We believed at the time that what we are doing is necessary for Slovenia to become a democratic, stable member of the European family, respecting rule of law, respecting good governance, respect for human rights, and so on and so forth. Whatever we did at the time, we did for ourselves. And when we did it, we didn't only adopt a very, I would say, robust reform agenda. We also implemented at the time all the reforms we accepted. So on the day when Slovenia became member of the European Union, 1st of May 2004, nothing dramatically changed, because we were already implementing what was expected from us. So the main change was actually adoption of Europe, becoming member of the European Monetary Union, and becoming a Schengen. That was really a significant change in our life. So again, I think it's a positive sign. There is this perspective, and we should not. We have to keep momentum and use the opportunity which lies ahead of us.
Franco, Frattini, we will continue with you. The same question, the speeches, and what's the comment on the message there from Western?
Well, I think Andrej has shown the glass half full. I will run the risk to be a bit more pessimistic, given my background, since everybody knows I want more Europe, not less Europe. I sadly want to say this statement was completely insufficient under my point of view for two reasons. Where Europe goes through difficult moment of negotiations or crisis, we think about Brexit, frictions between the North and the South, migration, etc., etc. European Commission has to be more advanced, much more than member states. If you stick to the minimum common denominator, for sure you will never succeed. And frankly speaking, when you talk about 2025, either you have the courage to say, for the moment, no further enlargement, because 2025 is even not in the next legislature, in the legislature after the next one, where the world will be probably completely different. So, either you say the process should be relaunched now, or you say there are no political conditions to go ahead fast and quickly. These would have been more acceptable and more honest by taking the responsibility to say, for a while, after Croatia, no further enlargement. Talking about 2025, for me, was a mistake. Second point, in this moment, Europe has to reconsider the vision launched in Thessaloniki in 2003. I was there as foreign minister. There was a vision behind. Today, what is the vision vis-à-vis the Balkans? There is no vision. Otherwise, Europe would have to consider that Balkans enlargement, Balkans integration since the end of the war in the Balkans was probably the most important success story of European Union in the last 15 years. And in a moment where we are in a difficult negotiation for Brexit, with the North and the South, with the Mediterranean exploding, let's have the success story relaunched and saying we have a common interest, we share interest to stabilize the Balkans because it is in European interest first, it is not a gift to the Balkans countries' citizens, and let's go ahead. I remember to myself, as we used to say, when I proposed the visa-free project and strategy for Western Balkans countries, how many were European countries against? I tell you, 5. I put on the table the proposal, the Commission says, take or leave it, and they took it. Because if you have a strong political will, things happen. If you stick to the future, frankly speaking, it's difficult. President Macron said something different, because he said very rightly, we need further integration, but he said further political integration. I think it was right, by highlighting the problem of Europe today is not a technical problem, it's not a logistical problem, it's not a problem of procedures, it's a political problem of leadership. And since he wants to be one of the new leaders in Europe, I think he will have to be very close to Germany. Germany will be more fragile than in the recent past because of this Jamaica perspective of government. President Macron was right to say, I stress the importance of political perspective. I close by saying, Western Balkans is now the only way, integration of Western Balkans, the only way to complete the reunification of Europe. We started in 2004 with the 10 new member states, to what Andrej alluded to, but we have to complete such as unification. We cannot imagine to leave a region as an enclave, surrounded in the north, in the east, in the south, from European member states, and this enclave left alone. That's absolutely untenable situation. For this reason, I think, we have immediately to retake as a priority Saloniki vision and to transform on a step-by-step basis into reality. Otherwise, have the courage to say, as a Juncker had at the beginning of this legislature, for this legislature, no further enlargement. Let's repeat for the next one. Let's not make a reference to 10 years on. This is not serious. Sorry to say.
We have 6 panels in this panel, so I will have to cover on time in the intro remarks. We will continue with you, Goran. And let me rephrase the question in this way. You, as a Secretary General of the RCC, work closely with the Commission. There are speeches and then there is a reality and action. Do you see any change in the work of the Commission towards the region, and do you see more France in the region since Macron took over?
See more France in the region since Macron took over. They left my board 3 years back, and now they insist to have 2 meetings next week, including a tete-a-tete meeting. There is a big delegation from France. So this might be a signal, a good one, and I do expect more engagement in France. Interesting enough, we were together in Svilanovic, Franco, and actually I came here to be very positive today. Last year, thanks to the invitation coming from 2 Sonjas, I'm grateful, I was a bit bitter. Then I was saying something like, quote, basically, look guys, use the funds and every support we get from the EU to reform our countries, but when it comes to accession, don't take it very seriously in the years to come. That was my message here back. Actually, my reading of Juncker's both speech and the letter, in particular, that he has sent to the European Parliament is hugely positive. It was President of Serbia who asked for a date in order to be able to decisively engage in a dialogue. This is the panel before this one, which was hugely interesting. This may not be a direct answer to this question. This may not be a date. It is a horizon for sure. And I take it as a positive step. I really am happy to say that if it is 2025 for my country, this one, I'll be very, very happy. I upload whoever is going to be Minister of Serbia then, Montenegro for sure, for the success they have achieved. I really believe it is of huge importance for the EU, but it is for the benefit of the people living in these 2 and other 4 economies, as we say, as I would expect the countries being very much changed between today and that day. So my reading is hugely positive. And then coming back to what you have said, comparing the Thessaloniki with what might come next year. I'm not entitled to say every detail. It should be for Bulgarian government, and I hope to see minister soon. But yes, the rumor is that they are decisive to have a formal meeting of the council, which will bring heads of states or governments, all the 6, together with their peers from the council next year. I can't say that they do have a date tentative. This is going to be a big thing. You know, immediately one impulse was this is a great idea, but it should not be a formal council. This is a great idea, but it should not be Thessaloniki too. Fine, leave it aside. Take it what it is. It is going to be the first time after many years that our heads of states and governments are going to be invited to be together with their peers in the council and to discuss the future. I would give a credit to this idea, and I hope it will be supported by everyone in the EU. And this is going to be a huge event to, again, give us a boost towards a membership. When it comes to the Commission, this is what you asked me, they are taking very seriously the letter being sent to the Parliament in order to prepare a strategy which would provide for a possibility for at least 2 out of 6 to join by 25, if not earlier. And of course, this is what I know. They've been hugely engaged now. You've seen in July, in New York, home countries, Franco in Italy, in Trieste. It was a great job done by the Italian Minister of Foreign Affairs. They engaged with everyone. And yes, these Prime Ministers were able to agree on multi-annual action plan on regional economic area as prepared by the Regional Cooperation Council. We are going to have a meeting now, 31st of October in Brussels with all the national focal points. On the next Tuesday, we are going to have a good meeting. This is going to be ICT Summit Steering Committee first meeting in Sarajevo in my office, supported by Germany, European Commission and RCC. We are going to discuss a digital agenda for the summit to take place next year. So many good things are coming as a result of both the engagement of the Commission, regional bodies and structures, but also these governments. I mean, give them a credit for what they've done in the last couple of years, all of them, and help them continue to reform societies. The agenda which is coming is related to democracy, human rights, media freedom. We have to go to the basics, but we also have to pay respect for what has been achieved.
Othon, let me bring you to the conversation. You work in a country that is leaving the EU. How can we bring a perspective of Brexit into this conversation about the future of the EU, also in the context of London hosting the next year's summit of the Berlin process, at the moment where we don't know where the talks between the EU and the UK on the exit will be, and what will be the climate between two sides?
Thank you, Milan. And before I comment on the country that I work, and which is a complete mess, and nobody knows what's going to happen, let me first thank and congratulate Sonja for putting this excellent three-day conference together. It's been a real value for us to be in this debate. Where I think that Brexit is really contributing to the current situation is that it actually brings realism into the understanding of what we're talking about. In that it exposes three fallacies, in my opinion. The first one is that there have been high expectations. Even the Thessaloniki agenda was very high in expectations. But in reality, there is an expectations versus performance gap from both directions, both from what the EU can offer as a transformational agency, as well as how the countries that want to become members can really deliver. The second fallacy is that the EU is the only game in town. It's not the only game in town. It's the most dominant game in town, but there are other competitors, whether we like it or not, and which is good because that has to do to put the EU to get its act together. There is obviously a big Russian competition that most of the EU countries don't know how to read. There is a big Chinese economic influence, and that again confuses the way that the EU directs its own investment in the Western Balkan region. There is Turkey that is getting out of the process, and that is also confusing the enlargement agenda. And there is Arab development and investment, rather, in these countries that, again, the EU countries cannot read exactly how to understand this, how to read this, whether this leads to radicalization or not. And the third one, which is a fallacy again, is the complacency and the belief that the countries here and the people and the populations will continue to have a consensus that they want to get into the European Union. I'm not so sure that this is the case and that the EU can take this kind of consensus for granted. Going back to the Juncker statement, my kind of propensity is not to listen to the statements too much, because I believe that they contribute to the atmospherics and they bring very, very short-term happiness or depression. But at the same time, one needs really to look at whether there is a roadmap, whether there is substance in this. And in technical terms, the enlargement continues, but in reality also, the enlargement mood is not what it was in Thessaloniki. It's very, very different now. The Netherlands referendum regarding the association of Ukraine with the EU was negative, and it showed the mood. Even in France, where Macron, says that he goes for a long-term political vision, again, there is a prospect of a referendum whether new member states are going to appear. And while there is an understanding in the European Union that the Western Balkans in particular, the countries that remain outside, is an unfinished business, in that they need and they belong to the European Union, the reality is that the mood has changed, and although the Commission has to be much more forthcoming, there are also the member states that have to be taken into consideration. And the fact that we are discussing, and we've been discussing, I think, very productively in this conference as well, the Berlin process, the fact that this is the only tangible thing that we are discussing is not exactly a very optimistic thing as to how the enlargement is going. But let me finish with a slightly optimistic note in that there may be a window of opportunity right now because the Franco-German alliance is reconfiguring itself in terms of the European vision. The economy seems to be, taking up, although in my opinion there's no sustainable growth there. There are low levels of growth, but still you don't have this harshness of the economic crisis period. The populist, I don't like that populist term, to be honest with you, the spoilers, let's call it, of the mainstream politics in Europe did not win the elections yet, although they are there in the background. And the governments and elites in the Western Balkan countries are more moderate and have a European perspective. So that is a window of opportunity for the European Commission to use it and continue and give a boost to its agenda.
Tom, you've spent some time in Serbia before this conference. What are we missing in this conversation so far? What is the key from your perspective across the pond?
Well, thank you. I'm very happy to be in Belgrade again, and even happier to speak not for my government, but only for myself. Bez dlaka na jeziku. The most important challenge for the future of the Western Balkans is not European integration or its relationship with NATO or a competition among Moscow and Brussels and Washington. The central issue for security, for stability, for prosperity is whether citizens will demand that their governments fight corruption, permit transparency in the government's economic dealings, promote an independent judiciary, and permit an independent media. These are precisely the topics most political parties want to avoid. Politicians know that if they can get voters to focus on anything other than their own economic interests, then successful politicians will be free to promote their own economic interests. It's why leaders in this region, and not only in this region, some prefer to create a climate of fear. They talk about nationalism, external threats, ethnic differences, or other populist themes, rather than talk about the issues that define democratic societies. And many have become expert in using one democratic element, elections, to create an anti-democratic and opaque economy. The political conditions that are attached to any investment, public or private, in many states of this region are such that it would be hard for me to advise any U.S. investor to put money into these states. It's of course possible to attract investment from Russia or China, but that inevitably means also importing the oligarchy and enrichment of senior officials that define those economies. Rule of law is crucial in itself, but it is, of course, in keeping with today's themes, absolutely central to the region's European future. I share the view of many European colleagues that it was a mistake for the Union to admit as members Romania and Bulgaria and arguably Croatia before rule of law requirements had been fully met. And now in Southeast Europe in the last 10 years, there's been insufficient progress and in some cases regression in both EU candidates and EU members. I think it's likely that premature enlargement would do more to corrode the rule of law among the 27 than it would to promote the rule of law among new members not sufficiently prepared. So the correct answer for the 27 is not to lower admission standards, but instead to focus early and in a very public way on actual performance under chapters 23 and 24. Now, I say this in full awareness of the trend in my own country, when we have an administration that is perhaps on track to break all historical records for corruption, and where money laundering is attractive for oligarchs and mafia and corrupt leaders from overseas. But I do have confidence that in the United States, we've built institutions that are not subservient to the interests of one party or one leader. In most states of the Balkans, institutions that should be independent, as well as state-owned economic enterprises, are structured and staffed to serve, above all, the economic and patronage interests of the ruling party. It's possible to blame somebody else, to blame 500 years of Ottoman rule, to blame communism, to blame Milosevic, to blame sanctions. But there's nobody to blame today. And there is no genetic reason that makes the peoples of the Balkans less capable than Scandinavians of building a non-corrupt society. Some view the Maidan uprising in Ukraine as the product of Western interference. But in my view, it was sparked when hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians asked simple questions, questions that are dangerous, that could get you killed in Moscow, but questions that will inevitably be asked in some states of this region. And those questions are, why is every minister a millionaire, and how did our president become a billionaire? Thanks.
Srdan, this is a great moment for you to continue. You sit in Brussels, you work for Open Society Fund, and you work with think tanks from the region, as well as from European Union member states, those that are left still working with the Western Balkans. And you also, I think, commissioned a series of public opinion polls in member state countries on the enlargement. This perspective that Tom just brought as American, with frankness and directness that we are used to hear from our American friends, is crucial, because there is a problem on the side of public opinion in many member states when they think that enlarging the EU to this region would bring more insecurity and corruption and organized networks and so on to the EU. So it would make EU less secure, more difficult to govern, and weaker at the moment when it is struggling to keep together at 27, keep its cohesion, and move on. It seems like a complex, one of these complex questions that we get used to it when discussing the future of the Western Balkans in Europe. But we heard from Goran that this is actually better perspective than 1 year ago. So what do you make out of it? I know that you prepare your own remarks, but feel free also to comment to what you heard in the panel.
No, of course. I mean, I think, there was an incremental change, but we need to pass from words to deeds when we speak about the EU. And also the local politicians fix too much their attention on the dates, when actually a lot depends on them. They themselves are often the biggest obstacle to a faster EU integration of their countries. So I think, but to come back now to your question, the EU mobilizes in the Western Balkans only when there is an external threat looming, Russian influence, for example, and only to prevent the return of the chaos of the 1990s. And there is a sense that as long as there is no external pressure, and as long as there are no tension amongst the countries themselves, whatever happens with them does not matter all that much. And that has been a consistent policy since last several years in Brussels. And declaratively, yes, the EU pays attention to the rule of law. But there is a sense in democracy. Exactly, but there is a sense in which democracy is not considered such big of a priority as stability. And since we are here in my hometown in Belgrade, I think, let's speak about the panel before this. We focus too much attention in Brussels on the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue, and this is indeed very important, but we have to look at what's happening in Kosovo and Serbia internally. And you cannot have a true stability and reconciliation in the Western Balkans without the states democratizing from within. So this is a bit continuing upon the previous remarks. A couple of figures. What can you say about the state of the rule of law in Serbia and Montenegro faced with the following figures? Out of the 83 organized crime-related murders in the last 5 years, only 4% saw a judicial outcome. It means that somebody was convicted for these murders. or made a plea bargain agreement for that matter. And then now confront this figure with the overall crime clearance rate for ordinary murders. It has been over 80%. You know, as the research of the Association of Judges here shows that 44% of them are exposed to political pressure. And also the data, media freedom was mentioned, very important. According to the data of here, I can talk about other countries later, but I think since we're here in Belgrade, according to the data of the Association of Journalists here, there were, in the last 3 years, 183 attacks on journalists. These include attacks against property, direct, indirect pressure, verbal attacks, including smear campaigns from the media close to the government, and also 26 physical assaults. And we have 3 murders of journalists that are still from Milosevic's period and its immediate aftermath that are still not resolved, you know. So I think the list is long, but and all this provides a clear indication that there is something seriously wrong. And you know, I think, risking to be a bit provocative, but reaching a legally binding agreement between Serbia and Kosovo seems like a child's play in comparison to establishing the rule of law in Serbia and Kosovo themselves, or in any other country for that matter. So, you know, I will repeat once again, and here I stop, you know, there will be no stability in the Western Balkans without strong democracies, free and open societies within the countries themselves.
Which corresponds to what I keep hearing in Berlin when I talk to officials. They have 2 huge concerns. One is rule of law is only window dressing, and they say, if we really if we want other countries to become accession countries to get a status, we need to show a good example of Serbia and Montenegro having some results in this, and not only this fake results. So we have to be stricter in terms of pointing out to our member states, to our publics and other member states, that look what has been achieved, these countries are improving in this. It's not only talk. And second, there is this Gruevski lesson, that you have strong stabilotocracy in the region, as it was coined in a BPAC study, that we both contributed somehow to, that you have a tendency also in this country to have a strong figure who will speak after this panel. And the concern in Berlin, I heard, is that how can we make sure that there is no longer a phenomenon of Gruevski in the making around, that this is not simply an authoritarian setup in the making which will last long and will not make the country achieving the goal of the government, which is moving closer to the EU and becoming EU member at one day. I had question for a second round to this panel, but we are running out of time, so let me propose something. I will go for short remarks of 1 minute to each of you for either additional comment you might have or reaction to what was discussed so far. And let me start now, Tom, with you, because I haven't asked you about the US role in the region now under the administration. DIS-OD, I think, does a marvelous job. We could see him in Albania and Macedonia as being an important part of solving the local crisis there. So from that point of view, it seems that the US diplomacy in the region has not been weakened since the new administration, and there is still US presence at the level that we became used to it. Is this only an illusion?
No, I think that's essentially right. The Balkans as an issue have not risen to the attention of the White House, and I'm not sure that they've risen to the attention of the Secretary of State. That's a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing because it means you don't have an active conflict that creates a crisis that forces the region onto the world's agenda. It's also a good thing because any issue that does raise up to the president's attention, he's almost certain to do the wrong thing, as he will do later today with regard to the nuclear agreement with Iran. But and I appreciate and share your opinion of the very good work that my successor, Hoyt Yi, has done on regional issues here. It's a bad thing because there should be greater attention from the United States, in particular in Bosnia-Herzegovina, where no progress is being made on any issue. And I would like to see the U.S. as involved as the European Union in promoting the European future of the region. But I don't think it's going to happen very quickly.
Goran, you raised your hand. You wanted to comment before?
No, I will immediately comment to what Tom has said. My understanding is that there was recently a meeting between Pence and Mogherini, and it was a good meeting. As a follow-up, I had a meeting with Hoyti in the States, as well as with Angelina Eichhorst, who is directly involved in the dialogue. I'm not saying they have agreed every detail, and the difference might be more of a focus when it comes to the EU officials on the process, and on the other side, more of a focus in the United States on the outcome. But this brings me one step further, and this is that difficult compromises have already been reached, and more are to be agreed in the coming months, years.
But not implemented.
And these agreements, these compromises are reached in the context of accession, in the context of realistic membership perspective. And this is why I take Juncker's statement and letter as a very positive promise. Therefore, now I see the end date, so to say. I see where do we go, and I believe the agreement is possible. Coming back to what you've said, yes, I do see that there is an intention to have both Washington and Brussels more engaged in the dialogue, and I guess in other issues in this part of the world. But the reason I wanted to intervene was actually what Srdan was saying on corruption, and few others have mentioned. I actually want to agree on this. Regional Cooperation Council is doing this Balkan barometer, fully compatible with Eurobarometer, and third year in a row, while asking people, what is your key problem? It is always, irrespective whether you are in Pristina, in Tirana, Belgrade, Novi Pazar, Skopje, it is unemployment, so no difference there. Second one, no difference there, overall difficult economic situation. Interesting enough, every year for 12 to 15 points up is perception of corruption. So now, this is the third biggest problem in the eyes of the people in this part of the world. 32% of them have said, which is 12 points more than a year back, and 15 points more 27 points more than 2 years back. So obviously, I'm not saying there is more of a corruption, but there is a perception that this is one of the key problems. This is why I'm saying years to come will bring us to focus on rule of law, as you mentioned, fight against corruption, as a part of the process we have to go through towards the accession. But it is going to happen. This is my message. It is more realistic today, after Juncker's letter, than it was years back. And then, frankly, when it comes to Serbia, I'm very happy to be in the hands of two very good women, a Minister for Integration, Jadranka Joksimovic, and a very capable chief negotiator, Tanja Miščević. So let them do the job and try to push that all of these, which are the problems in the eyes of the people, are really reflected by the government. And there I go back to the issues which are not only economy, but also a daily political and life of this country as a democratic country. So these issues will have to be resolved, and I trust that there will be full support of both the Commission and the Council.
State Secretary Logar, in order to keep and sustain the enlargement as a realistic perspective and membership for Serbia and other countries, you need to have a coalition of, so to speak, enlargement friends among the EU-27. Slovenia is definitely one of them. Germany is now uncrowned leader of that pack. Who else is still there?
Yeah. But first on the remark made by Thomas, I tend to disagree with him. I mean, accession of Romania, Bulgaria, and Croatia being a mistake. I don't think so. I think if that was a mistake, then people will start talking that accession of other countries from the Western Balkans was also will be a mistake. So I think spreading such kind of, opposition probably does not help really.
And would you say that there was a learning process from it?
Excuse me?
Would you rather say that there was a learning process from Bulgaria, Romania not being sufficiently prepared?
Not necessarily a learning process, but I think that they deserve the membership in the European Union. Let's be frank about that. I would like to mention the Brdo-Brioni process. And we drafted a letter together with our colleagues, friends from Western Balkans. Basically 2 points. First, we emphasize the necessity to narrow the economic and development gap between the existing members and the candidate countries, and secondly, to engage candidate countries in fulfilling their obligations in chapters 22, 23, and 24. I think that's very important because all the ministers from the candidate countries did sign this letter, and the letter was later sent to the members of European Union. I think there is enormous interest of Bulgarian presidency to organize high-level summit. I had the opportunity yesterday to talk in the format of V4 plus Slovenia meeting, and of course Bulgaria is fully committed to organize that kind of meeting and allow member states to be part of deliberations about their own future in the European Union. Slovenia is definitely a friend of enlargement. We believe enlargement is in the interest of European Union, not only the candidate countries, and we should really give, as Goran has said, credit to the candidate countries, implementing the requirements needed for the membership in European Union.
Mr. Frattini, your remarks, please be brief.
I want to make a brief comment on 2 remarks that have been made. The first one concerning the benefit and importance of European enlargement to Western Balkans. I don't agree with those, particularly member states, who used to say closer integration of Western Balkans would make Europe more insecure. Absolutely the opposite. By giving a green light to the newest member states, Croatia, Romania, Bulgaria, we compare cost and benefits, and the result was benefits and interest are much more than potential problems. I make 2 concrete examples. Now I work as a judge in the Italian Supreme Court, dealing with mafia and infiltration of mafia into economy. I would like very much to have the possibility to apply for an European arrest warrant for one of the terrorists that are caught in one of the countries of Western Balkans instead of waiting for a rogatories. I would like very much to apply for confiscation measures directly, as we do between Italy and Germany, Italy and Spain. So tremendously important in terms of security, not less, more security. My final point, I think US should be more involved. You are absolutely right. Why? Because if you want to implement global strategy against terrorism, this is one of the regions that should be taken into consideration, because foreign fighters, people coming back from Syria, Daesh affiliates are in this region. If you don't care as US and we leave Europe alone, you weaken the comprehensive strategy against terrorism. All those that we arrest in Rome have links with some of the countries and some of the cells that are in the Balkans. We have arrestations in the north of Italy, in the south of Italy. Many have links. So for all these reasons, much better to have Western Balkans more integrated rather than less integrated.
Othon?
I liked your term coalition of friends, and I'm going to build on this because I was talking about member states before. Now,
I hope there will not be on the illusion that it's Germany and Slovenia full stop.
Let me say first that I don't believe that there are good members and bad members, because all members of the European Union may have problems. You've got, the fantastically organized state of Britain, and you've got the Brexit there. France has its own kind of problems. German elections, we're seeing the EFT now. Poland, we've been discussing, all countries have problems, and they can create problems to the European Union, as it were. So I don't think that, we can divide between good countries, bad countries. I don't think it was a mistake that Bulgaria and Romania acceded into the European Union. The problem is that this is an unequal European Union in terms of economic development, and this is where a lot of attention should be made. It's a pity that Bulgaria is the most underdeveloped and economically less advanced country in the EU, and Romania as well. So this needs really to do, a lot of attention. And what I would also like to say regarding the Berlin process as a final point is that it has always been my personal complaint as well, in that starts with Germany, and it's fine because this is a powerful economic country and has an interest that the Western Balkans do not go into the wrong direction. Austria is also a country that has expressed and has shown a lot of investment in the region and has a primary interest there. France's priority, it's not. The UK is sorting out its own mess, and I don't know how the London conference will be able to deal with the Berlin process. Why are the countries...
Italy. You have Franco Frattini next to you.
Italy is a country which is concerned, and I was also wanted to mention why aren't the rest of the countries in the region involved? I mean, there's a Bulgarian presidency there that should be involved in the Berlin process. Greece, was the one that produces the Thessaloniki agenda, and Romania has an interest, let alone Croatia and Slovenia. So I don't understand why it has to be a coalition of the strong countries. It has to be a coalition of friends of enlargement of the Western Balkans that needs to win the day here.
And convince the others. Srdan.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is really about a realization that there is no geopolitical alternative to the EU in the Western Balkans, that the only alternative to that is chaos. I think in the EU they still need to understand this and draw right conclusions, which means that, at times the negative influence from other geopolitical powers is here and present, but it's only here because the EU allows it. Some time ago, I read an article of Professor Frattini in an Italian newspaper, Libero, and you compared, you used the metaphor from physics, and you compared, you said that foreign policy is like physics. If there is an empty space, somebody will enter. You used it for a different geopolitical context, but this is exactly what we're talking about here in the Balkans. Porous, corrupt kleptocracies are perfect targets for geopolitical powers that well understand the limits of their reach and that are only here to make the EU's and NATO's job more difficult. So I think, united, strong democracies, open societies are impermeable to such pressures. We often think EU needs to be, I agree, EU needs to be tougher with the local leaders. And yes, indeed. And there is a prevailing view that, being tough with local leaders and keeping other powers out is incompatible. And that local leaders need tapping on the back to resist the pressure from Russia or I don't know whom else. And this is false. Local leaders are craftily sucking in external actors for their own internal political benefits. So they're playing the EU, US, and Russia as well, by the way.
Very good. We have 25 minutes for questions and answers from the audience. Ladies, this is your turn. If there is an interest to ask the first question. Here, please introduce yourself and wait for the mic.
Hello, I'm Jovan Marovic, Political Network Montenegro. I had chance yesterday to share some thoughts on topic, but still would like to hear your opinion. First of all, I don't see the reason or the point of calculations about the year when Serbia and Montenegro will be ready for accession. So basically, this is more when the EU potentially will be ready for new members and not when Serbia and Montenegro will be ready for accession. And that's why I think that will be more encouraging just to have this announcement about strategy for successful accession of the Serbia and Montenegro to the EU without this date or without year. So basically, I don't see what will be content of this strategy, which will be published next year. And basically, if its name is strategy, one should expect to see improved benchmarks, to see activities clear, because EU is following following and monitoring reform processes in Serbia and Montenegro for some time, for 5 years in Montenegro, and we opened chapters on the rule of law at the beginning of negotiations. So civil society in Serbia and Montenegro tried over and over again to push European Commission to improve benchmarking system, to have clear indicators, to actually help Serbia and Montenegro to improve rule of law. So basically, my question is, what do you expect and what would you like to see in that strategy which should be helpful for Serbia and Montenegro to improve rule of law? Thank you.
Other question from other ladies in the room? If not, I will take any questions from also male participants here. And I will take more questions in one package and then turn over to speakers to answer. Please.
Thank you. I'm the British ambassador to Serbia. And I'm not going to talk about Brexit itself beyond saying that we're not going away. Our interests in security, stability and prosperity in the Balkans don't change. But what I do want to do is agree with Othon Anastasakis that our departure does raise questions, and important ones to answer. Much of the discussion has been about the tension between process in reform and accession and real substance. Now, there's plenty of process next year. Apart from the Western Balkan Summit in London later in the year, there's the Bulgarian proposal, there's the EBRD's economic proposal. There'll be plenty of opportunities for leaders in the region and leaders more widely in Europe to talk about the future. But what are they going to say about the big question of enlargement? It seems to me that every enlargement that there has been in the history of the European Union has been as much a statement about the Union as it has been about the countries joining. When Britain joined, it was a statement that we're serious, we want all the big powers in Europe in this project. With Spain and Greece and Portugal, it was we are the democracies. With the big enlargement, it was Europe whole and free. What's the message now? It can't be, if there's to be a successful political negotiation of accession for the Balkan countries, it can't be, well, we have some problems that we need to sort out with these guys. It's got to be a bigger message than that. What is it?
Fine, and there was a question in this corner. And then I'll take you. Please take the mic to this gentleman over there. You can perhaps stand up.
Hi, hello, my name is Dražen Marović. I will have a similar question to the one that was raised by His Excellency. First of all, to say and to repeat what Mr. Frattini said in the opening statement and to confirm that there was the importance of the political leadership coming from the Mr. Frattini in visa waiver program. I was chief negotiator on the behalf of Serbian government in that process, and I felt and we felt the support and the window of opportunity that was open to the Western Balkan countries to negotiate visa waiver, and we were all fortunate enough to seize that opportunity. We discussed, and it was more attention given to the threats and weaknesses of the region. But as I said, similarly to what was stated before, any successful strategy should be focused on strengths and opportunities. What do you see as the key strength of the region to be seen as a future member of the EU member state from the member states of the EU? So what are the key strengths in the region? And let's try to advocate for that. Thank you.
And one more question from this side.
Brian Abel, Canadian Embassy. Just a quick question for Dr. Svilanovic. You've spoken very positively about the EU accession process. I'd just like to ask you, do you consider that the EU accession process is producing a good result in Bosnia-Herzegovina? And if not, what steps do you think are necessary to get it on track?
Okay. Is there somebody in the room that really wants to ask a question no matter what, in case we don't have time for one more round? Or I can close it. All right, then let's start with speakers. Please pick up one question that was asked and address it. And Goran, you're looking to me, so why don't we start with you?
As I was directly asked about Bosnia and Herzegovina, though I'm not citizen of, it's only that my office is there, I like to say the following. First, I was really very supportive for the change in the EU policy, this famous UK-German initiative, which became the EU policy for Bosnia and Herzegovina, this change and shift from big political issues, Sejdić-Finci, as a precondition for everything else, into let's focus on economic and other reforms in the country, while hoping that eventually these political issues will be possible to be discussed and resolved in Bosnia and Herzegovina. My 2 cents for Bosnia and Herzegovina is the following, and I'm sorry, it is again directly linked with accession. The negotiation date will be the key date for Bosnia and Herzegovina. No, I don't think that they will resolve the outstanding issues before that day. Yes, I do believe that in the negotiations, membership negotiations, it would be possible for the people at this side of the table, this is the famous coordination mechanism of Bosnia and Herzegovina, giving an answer to who is sitting here, while we know it is the EU over there. Once they agree on this, these people will have to understand that there, in my eyes, will be functionality chapter as a special chapter. This functionality chapter will, in writing, encompass each and every agreement they reach. Will ask, chapter 23, chapter 24, this or that, in writing. And in my eyes, this thick book, which will emerge at the end of the process, which might last 5, 10 years, I don't know how long, is going to be a real constitution of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which will resolve the outstanding political issues. They can do it in the accession process with full support of the EU, which will be in a situation to say, yes, this, what you have agreed, fits fully the acquis. And we are going to have the constitution they themselves have written, which is not what they have today, in the accession. And this is really going to be the end result for Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm not negative. I understand it will take years. And I actually am praying and supporting and pushing to start with them, to start negotiating with Bosnia and Herzegovina. If you want these issues resolved, they can be resolved in the accession negotiation. On security, and I'm done for today. Franco, thank you very much for launching this idea of security-related issues. You've done a great job, as you've been mentioned a minute ago, on visa facilitation, but on other issues when you were serving both your government, but later on the Commission. I'm going a week from now to Wilton Park to discuss security-related issues while they are preparing to host the summit of our countries. My key message is going to be there clear. Security threats which affect the EU today do not originate from the Balkans. Yes, money laundering is a problem. Yes, narcotic smuggling is a problem. Yes, corruption is a problem and weak institutions. But no, the terrorist threat is not coming from the region into the EU. Please understand this. And I do not accept stigmatizing Bosnia and Herzegovina for foreign fighters, Kosovo or Albania. Yes, there are, but I'd like just to share with you an information. Both the RCC and the European Commission are engaged in what is called integrated internal security governance. The EU Commission has provided funds, and we are going really to focus on prevention, on violent extremism, which leads to terrorism and foreign fighters. The figures are going down, I'm happy to announce. But yes, there are other issues like how to deal with these people, how to integrate them, etc. But please do understand, security threats do not originate from the Balkans. And this, I hope, will be understood by the citizens of the EU. Thank you.
Perhaps we can tie the first two questions about what would you like to see in the new EU enlargement strategy and what should be the message of the next EU enlargement. Who would like to tackle that? Okay.
No, thanks for your question, Jovan. I think it's a really pertinent one. And I think, I obviously don't know what will be in that strategy, but I think it's needed. Recently, our common friend, Stevo Muk, wrote a piece for the Montenegrin Daily Vijesti. It was written on the 10th anniversary of his organization, Institute Alternative, and it was entitled All Our Failures. And read it. You will understand that even if you have 28 chapters opened and 3 provisionally closed, you may be still lacking genuine reforms. And you may be lacking them even if you open 35 chapters and you eventually join the Union. It's enough to look at some EU member states to understand that reforms are neither perfect nor irreversible. But, and I will link now to the second question. I think, you know, EU system of values, laws, does not have an alternative. And, but the process is set up to ensure that these regulations and principles are implemented by the candidate countries and the member states. Maybe need improvement, and we need to work together on this. And you asked what is the purpose, what would be the purpose of this enlargement, because every enlargement, it's High Representative Vice President of the European Commission said it at the beginning of this year. It's about reuniting Europe. And I know that may seem a bit counterintuitive in the context of Brexit, but there are still majority of the states in this continent that want to be part of the EU. That's an exception. So I think, you know, for some, EU enlargement is indeed just a job, a step in a political career. But we believe in it here. All these people in all the countries, for us, it's everything. It's a responsibility towards our children, towards our parents and grandparents that did not live the day to see the continent fully united, and they waited for it for such a long time. And I think, you know, after 2019, we need the same believers in the driving seat on enlargement in Brussels.
State Secretary Logar, perhaps you can take it from here.
Well, I was thinking about the strength of the candidate countries, what they will bring into the European Union. I think what they bring is diversity. It's a very important element we are talking about. Now, on strategy, of course, the strategy depends very much on the candidate countries, the acceding countries, and you should talk more often with the Commission. They are willing to talk and define the benchmarks for. But don't forget, don't be too much focused only on opening different chapters. It's very important to temporarily close, because until everything is not agreed, nothing is agreed. And you know, it's very difficult if you don't take this approach.
One question seems to me particularly important. The question, what is the strategy for the future? I said in my introduction, a new strategy is badly needed. I said about relaunching the Thessaloniki strategy. I would highlight 3 points that are also the reasons of strength that have been stressed. Why should Europe be interested to open in the way and to getting closer to the Balkans? 3 points. The first, Copenhagen criteria cannot be changed. While playing the game is not possible to change, they are decided during the presidency of European Commission from Romano Prodi. They are there, and it's not a package of country. Each and every country should be evaluated by its own merits. This is a precondition. But the 3 reasons, economic reason, well, we need a new economic vision. The new economic vision is free, competitive, and open space for new investment, new market, new infrastructure. This is a factor of strength. Second is a geopolitical nature. I've already said, security. We need a new network for better security in a key region, which, Goran is right, is a transit region for many factors of insecurity, but nevertheless, a network of cooperation among police, among prosecutors is badly needed, because this is the key between Mediterranean and Black Sea for geostrategic reasons. And the last point, what about the citizens of the region, because you mentioned kindly a visa-free strategy. The citizen got something which was visible, tangible. What is now tangible in the further steps towards the accession for citizens? I think we have to include in that new vision I would say, how to improve the feeling of the citizens. They will be safer, they will be more prosperous, they will be living in a better environment. Otherwise, we run the risk to discuss among the elite about the rules of enlargement, and to do that against or by avoiding any discussion with the citizen. Citizen and civil society, this is why, should be protagonists, as it was in the case of Saloniki. There were around the table people representing NGOs, not only applauding, but showing why the citizens were happy with the vision. Now we have to renew such a feeling of 14 years ago.
Tom, as a freshly retired American diplomat, where do you see the role of the Western Balkans in Europe in the future?
Well, let me take Jovana's very good question as a starting point. Absolutely right that the more important question is when these states in this region are ready to join, and that should be more important than when the European Union 27 are ready to admit them. At this point, 2025 is just 4 digits hanging in the air. But at some point, based on history, it may become a target date. And history also demonstrates that once the EU sets a target date for enlargement of specific members for admission, that target date becomes so important that that is when the EU begins to compromise its own criteria for admission. And that's why having a date is potentially important. A couple more very quick comments. I agree with Othon, there are no good or bad EU members. I agree with Franco that it was good for the European Union to admit Romania, Bulgaria, Croatia. And I absolutely agree it will be good for the European Union when and as it admits new members from the Western Balkans. My point is that what's good for the European Union is not necessarily the best thing for the candidate countries. If the states of the Western Balkans were admitted to the EU today, at their current level of democratic development, there would be no impetus for them to work harder on rule of law. The case of Hungary demonstrates that the leverage you have is before admission, and it disappears after admission.
I'm sorry, I have to cut you there, because we have to close very soon. The opening ceremony is starting in a few minutes. We'll close with you, Othon, but please be very brief.
Yeah, just 2 points. One is a response to the British ambassador that I was critical towards the political class, the way it's handling the Brexit issue. But I think that London, or wherever it happens, conference can be really useful in terms of what's happening with the Berlin process in actually a very transactional perspective, but also the security dimension. And the big message, I believe, cannot be anything else, but can only be democracy and liberalism. And that's what is under threat right now. And we really don't want to see any more website pages which are black. It has to be democracy in all the, in all the areas.
Thank you very much to all the speakers, also to you in the audience. And I have one housekeeping note to make. Please remain seated while they will be rearranging the stage for the closing ceremony, which will include President Vucic. Thank you very much. And a big applause, big hand to the panelists.
Ladies and gentlemen, I kindly ask you to take your seats. Thank you.
Ovo mora da se skloni.
Esteemed Mr. President of the Republic of Serbia, Your Excellencies, dear guests, dear friends of the Forum, we have come to the conclusion of another Belgrade Security Forum. It is our privilege that the President of the Republic of Serbia, His Excellency Aleksandar Vucic, has joined us for the closing ceremony. I would like to use this opportunity to invite him to address the Forum. Mr. President, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, Your Excellencies, thank you for giving me the opportunity to address you at the closing of the Belgrade Security Forum. Ever since it has been founded, this forum has managed to become one of the leading conferences on foreign policy and regional security. This is neither mine nor credit of the government, but a success of the joint vision of the three non-governmental organizations, two Sonjas and Maya. Dear Sonjas and Maya, dear Mr. Crnobrnja, I want to cordially congratulate you on the immaculate organization of another successful forum. So far, you have organized more than 100 panel discussions, gathered almost 500 speakers from 55 countries in front of more than 3,000 participants in the past 6 years. I am certain that this year's Belgrade Security Forum has put additional light on contemporary security trends, improved understanding for the regional situation, and pointed towards development directions we need in reaching sustainable peace. Peace is both a prerequisite and result of the development process. This goes for the Balkans too, which has unfortunately been long known as a conflict, unstable and relatively technologically and economically underdeveloped region, and on top of all, region burdened with stereotypes. I would say something that I haven't prepared for this speech, and will speak about it openly, freely here before all of you. First of all, I did my best to read some of the speeches and to see what some of the panelists were saying about regional stability, reconciliation process in the region, and many other important issues for our country and for an entire region of Western Balkans. I have to say that as a president of Serbia, I learned a lot from them, heard a lot of news, heard and listened to the different arguments, different facts, and wanted to add that I'm a bit less optimistic than I was last year, and even last year I was not very optimistic. That's not in my nature, but immediately to add that Serbia, with no doubt, will do its best to preserve the regional peace and tranquility, which is the main and the most important precondition for the development and progress of an entire region. When I say that I'm less optimistic, it's not always because of us, but also have to say that I'm not ashamed and not also afraid to admit that we are a part of, not to say a problem, but we don't react always properly. From time to time, we overreact on something, or we undermine bumps on the roads and difficulties that we might face with. But at the same time, I have to say that there are even bigger problems that are imported from instabilities, even in Europe and in all the other regions worldwide. And last year, I was speaking here about our dialogue process with Pristina, and have to admit that we succeeded in one very important issue. Some people would say that was the purpose of our dialogue, and that was something of the biggest significance for both sides, either Serbs, either Albanians. In the last 4 or 5 years, we didn't have any dead guys in our ethnic conflicts in Kosovo, which is important for all the citizens of, we say it, Pristina. Some people would say it Kosovo, doesn't matter. Call it in a way you want. People at least a bit felt more secured and more safe than before. And if we contributed at least a bit for that, speaking about Belgrade and Pristina's authorities, satisfied about it. But it's not enough. If we don't analyze our position in the global world, if we don't analyze altogether our common position in Europe, I think that we would carry on with suffocating each other in a way on our EU path, but at the same time on our way to get out from the economic crisis which all the countries and territories of the Western Balkans were facing with. And that's why we propose that internal dialogue here for Serbian people, for the representatives of all different parts of our society, people from all social spheres, because we think that we need to talk to each other, that we need to get our requests, our demands closer to reality, and we ask the other side to do the same. Otherwise, we would have this kind of a frozen conflict for next 10, 20, 50 years, and I don't think that we have enough time to lose if we think about the future of our kids and our grandkids. Saying that and bearing in mind all the prejudices, all the superstitious approaches, I would speak about us, wouldn't even mention the other side. I know that it would be a very difficult process for us. It'll be, politically speaking, a very costly process for the people that will lead that process. But anyway, that would be something very important, as I said, for the future, not only for Serbia, but that would be very good for an entire region. Because unlike all the others, I'm not ashamed to say that I'm coming from the Balkans, but it's very much diverse, not only people, but everything else has many things to offer to Europe, to the world, and that we can do much better in the future if we get along and if we work together. If we don't do it, if we don't realize that, I'm absolutely certain that we'll face another failure like all the others did before us. It'll mean that, and I spoke to the Prime Minister yesterday evening, next cabinet session, they're going to provide all technical conditions to launch and to provide into these everything that we have spoken on about the dialogue process. They're going to organize that working group, which will, as I already said, provide an entire logistics to everything. And then we'll start with this. And we'll be patient enough to listen to everybody. And after that, I'm sure constructive, but doesn't matter. Whatever type of a dialogue we're going to face, after that we'll be courageous enough to go with some kinds of proposals to present to our people, before our people. And I think that is very important. That is something of the biggest significance, something that has a real content without an empty words, without political marketing and everything else. And I think that the real solution lies somewhere in between of our concessions, Albanian concessions, and attempts of international community to understand both of us, not only their own interests. It has to be first of all beneficial for Serb and Albanian people living in Kosovo and for Belgrade and Pristina themselves. On the other hand, I have to say that this Catalonian issue raised and increased a lot of other questions from Serbian people and from Serbian side. And we didn't hear proper answers. And my suggestion, my humble suggestion to all the people from European Union and international community is not to comment or to stay silent when we ask these questions. Because what we heard so far, it was something better not to be heard. Explanations that were worthless, explanations that were not true, and explanations that people were not even laughing, that people made very furious in this country. That's why and at the same time, we as a responsible politicians, as a serious people, we must not raise any expectations among our people after Catalonian case, because people need to know that we cannot compare us with some bigger, stronger countries in a much better position than we were, and than we still are. And we need to take into consideration everything that we had to deal with, everything that we'll have to deal with. And therefore, I'm sure that we'll be able to conclude many things in compliance and in accordance with the reality and with the needs of our Serbian people. Speaking about an entire region, have bigger fears for some other territories of our region, and I have already expressed that thousands of times. I'm just very much afraid that I'll be right about it, and still hope that, and it would be very jubilant to admit that someone else was stronger in using better arguments than we were, forecasting bigger problems in some other regions, not Kosovo or not something between Belgrade and Pristina as a bigger problem. Anyway, Serbia so far supported and will always support territorial integrity of Bosnia and Herzegovina and territorial integrity of Republika Srpska within Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I think that no one can say a single word about Serbia's behavior on these issues. I think that we do respect our neighbors, and we'll do our best to do. I had a communication 2 days ago with Mr. Izetbegovic. I would propose different routes of highway, but after all, we'll have to accept what they're going to propose to us. It's not a big deal for us. We'll do our job, and we'll connect Serbia with Bosnia in a way they want it to be done. At the same time, we started to discuss an issue of our common borders, and I think that by the end of the year, and I'm going to meet Dragan Čović tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, sorry that I'll be tired, tomorrow I think, tomorrow evening. I'm going to meet Dragan Čović once again, and we'll discuss this border between Serbia and Bosnia, and there are 3% of territory still unresolved, and I think that we'll be able to resolve it by the end of this year, and that would be a great signal, terrific signal, that something that people thought it was the most difficult task for all of us in this region, that it was solvable, and that we did something courageously and in a very responsible way. Of course, there is one big issue which we started to speak about last year for the first time, and during my tenure, 5 years tenure, we'll insist on that. We'll encourage government to carry on with the hard work on that. We'll encourage all the others in the region to accept it. That's a creation of regional economic zone in a real sense of that word. And after that, after 5 years, I'm sure that someone will be able to say, okay, now we can go to the next stage, to the next level, which is going to be a customs union. And I will never give in on that. And will never withdraw from this position, because we are too small. We have 7 million people here. They have 3.5, 1.5, 2.7 million, 500, 600,000 people. We are all too small, and we don't create even a unique market. And we need to present ourselves as a unique market. Then, when we create the same type of subsidies and incentives for the investors, we'll attract more investors. Is it Serbia that has the biggest problem with the investors? No. Serbia has more investors than all the others together. Of course, it's still not enough for us. Can you imagine? What about the others? And if we do so, if we'll be able to relax our common trade, if people that are exporting or selling 5 kilometers away through our borders milk and cheese, if they won't be waiting for hours and days to cross the border, I think that we're going to save at least up to 7 to 10% of their incomes and they can use it for something else. They can invest it into creating new jobs for the people in this region. And I think that we need to work in two parallel fields. One is political, to resolve all the problems from the past, or at least to try, if it's not possible to resolve them all, to keep the peace and tranquility and to resolve it one by one. And on the other hand, that's that second field, to boost our economies, our economic ties, our trade exchange, and to see what we can do to attract more investors and to create a better market for all the others that would like to sell their goods here in this region. And why I was saying that I'm not that optimistic as I was last year. I'm insisting on that because all sorts of instabilities that you are facing with in Europe, that we are facing all over the world, you can always see it in the easiest possible way, and first of all, and before anywhere else, you can see it in the Balkans. And we always take examples from the world which we think that we might use for our own purposes. But it's not an easy times, and with all your support, and was watching 15 minutes of your today's panel on Kosovo, although it was a difficult one. Even today, and Alex, don't be dissatisfied with this, I think it was very useful, and people were able to hear something new, although Marco took care of elections and everything else that was needed, the other people as well. But anyway, we opened the dialogue process, and I'm profoundly grateful to Sonja that was able to organize it. And thank you for helping Serbia, coming to Belgrade, participating in this forum. You do a great job for this country, because we do read everything, we do follow everything, we learn a lot from you, and we'll take best experiences and best arguments to use it for the Serbia's people benefits and for the better future of our country. Once again, thank you very much for allowing me to participate in this forum, to, let's say, make that kind of a final conclusion. But I'm sure that we'll carry on with a terrific work next year. If we can be helpful, we'll really like to be, and we'll always be at your disposal. And I'm begging all the others, distinguished participants, to take care of the region. Don't forget this region, because many things have already started here in the Balkans. I'm not sure that everything has finished so far. And we need you. We wish you a very strong presence here in the region. And from time to time, that's my another prayer, and I really beg you for that. Put yourself into Serbian people's shoes, and I'm absolutely certain that you will understand our needs from time to time. Not only, it would be a bit harsh from my side to be said, but anyway, we'll say it, not only to easily understand an interest of your own. Thank you very much, and thank you, Sonja. Thank you for everything you organized these days, and wish you good luck next year and in all upcoming years and decades. Thanks a lot once again.
Thank you, Mr. President, for your speech. It would be our pleasure if you could stay till the end of the ceremony. With that said, I would like to invite Sonja Gajic, Director of the Belgrade Center for Security Policy, Mr. Mihailo Crnobrnja, President of the European Movement in Serbia, and Mrs. Sonja Licht, President of the Belgrade Fund for Political Excellence, to address the forum.
Thank you, President Vucic, to addressing the Belgrade Security Forum, but the closing conclusions come from the organizers, the Belgrade Fund for Political Excellence, European Movement in Serbia, and Belgrade Center for Security Policy. So these are the conclusions we made over the 3 days. The 7th Belgrade Security Forum identified as the main crisis in Europe the erosion of democracy and rule of law. Deepening and rapidly increasing inequalities left many people behind, feeling that they do not share same space and community with political, economic, and intellectual elites in their countries. This is a fruitful ground for populist politicians and movements who govern by the proliferation of fear of the others. The others in the EU these days are migrants, while in the Western Balkans, the others are usually neighboring nations and opposition. Populists govern not only by exclusionary rhetoric, but also in action. They capture state resources with two purposes. First, to deliver some public goods to their constituencies, and second, more importantly, to lock their power by removing checks and balances and media scrutiny. This exclusion of different perspectives and minorities by legal means is rapidly growing within the EU, and it prevents EU from exercising influence in the neighborhood, and it's starting to lose credibility. The division within states perpetuates divisions among states in Europe. Belgrade Security Forum calls for the EU member states to take leadership and rebuild the rule of law as a cornerstone of European identity. The participants of Belgrade Security Forum also recognize our own and other pro-democracy actors' responsibility, both within the EU and the Western Balkans, to engage more at the grassroots level with those in favor of democracy and peace, and to mobilize an untapped potential of youth and women. The Western Balkans today is a periphery of the EU, and the region that seems to get attraction of EU decision makers only when there is a perception of external influence or internal instability. Berlin process intensified the process of accession by providing perspective of economic development through regional interconnectedness, but did not yet manage to increase accountability of the Western Balkan politicians for the implementation of the agreements made. In next phase of the process, we need more monitoring of commitments and tangible benefits for citizens to be delivered. The key for the progress in the Western Balkans does not lie in the hands of EU elites, but of the region. Instead of the initiatives for action should be taken by Western Balkan people and nations. Instead of waiting for the EU to mediate bilateral disputes, we need responsible leadership of politicians, but also civil society in each of the nations to seek dialogue and reconciliation in a consistent manner and not compete in shifting the blame. The Western Balkans should also seek its place in discussions on the future of Europe without voting right, so to be able to prepare for the changed EU that we will join. And last but not the least, all of these solutions require that we discuss uncertainties without fear, in a free discussion, and taking into account the views of those with whom we disagree. The 7th Belgrade Security Forum, under the title of Building a Common Future in the Age of Uncertainty, managed to gather more than 120 speakers and 700 participants from more than 35 countries, as well as 250 journalists from Serbian, regional, and international media. And I'll give a floor now to Mr. Crnobrnja as someone who negotiated our accession in a former state within the EU to give a more optimistic or pessimistic view of the discussions in these 3 days.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, Excellencies, let me introduce myself. I am the former ambassador of former Yugoslavia to the former European community. The community became a union. Yugoslavia unfortunately disintegrated, and I went back to professorship. But now I'm the president of the European movement in Serbia, and we are very, very proud to be one of the co-organizers of this event. It has meant a great deal for us, and it will give us new power and new energy to do what our mission is. And our mission actually is rather simple. It's to bring Europe into Serbia so that Serbia can go to Europe. Meaning, we set the standards, we try to help both the government and the population in realizing what needs to be done in the process of accession to the European Union. So one of the things that we really need to do, when I'm talking about we, I mean the European movement, we need to move out of the krug dvojke, which is of tram number 2, yes, and stop European movement being so Belgrade-centric. Needs to go south, particularly south. In the north, in Vojvodina, it's much, how shall I say, much more comfortable and much more present, but we are moving in the direction of the south. And my last remark will be on the dates which have been set. The president has, in the capacity of prime minister, I believe, mentioned 2021 as the time when we will be ready to enter the European Union. Now, from the other side, we have a kind of a target date of 2025. What we would like to do is be ready by 2021, and we will try our hardest to help in making that happen. And then it will be a question of circumstances and the way in which Europe manages to reset itself in the next coming years, to reconsolidate and take on new challenges or new members. Thank you very much for participating in all of this and for helping in make this forum a really good, excellent occasion. Thank you.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished guests, and wonderful audience participants of the 7th Belgrade Security Forum. I underline wonderful because to sit here the whole day, listening, participating is quite a job. We did it once again. We came to the end of the forum. Many people already told us that this was even better than last year. Raising expectations mean in the same time a compliment, but also a difficult path to follow. Of course, the forums would not be possible, first and foremost, without the people who participate in them. But the bread and butter of the forum is being secured by our partners, especially our strategic partners. Thus, I have to say a great thank you to Open Society Foundations, Wilfred Martens Center, Robert Bosch Stiftung, Balkan Trust for Democracy of German Marshall Fund, and European Fund for the Balkans as our strategic partners, and many, many others who very seriously supported this endeavor and who are standing with us now for years. We very much hope that there will be more in the future, because otherwise it will be difficult to meet your expectations. As for the thanks use that we received from day one, started with Minister Gajic, ended with the President, and many, many other people. I really have to say that, first of all, you were right, Mr. President, one person is missing. Maya, which is not with us because she has a small baby, and for the time being she's spending her time with David. We congratulate her also from this stand for that wonderful achievement. Professor Crnobrnja was here with us instead of her. Thank you for being here on behalf of the European movement. But I want to say that the wonderful words, the thank yous, in fact, do not go to us in the first place. They go to that wonderful team, part of the team, yeah, they are there, a wonderful team who is working day and night. Many of them over 12 months with a huge commitment and even bigger passion. You cannot do this work if you are doing it as 3 non-governmental organizations without huge work and huge passion. The other group I want to thank very much are our volunteers. From year to year, we have a group of wonderful young girls and boys without whose work you wouldn't feel this comfortable and the whole thing would not be that smooth. Thank you very much once again for your participation. Once again, I want to thank our guests who traveled, some of them from far away. Wish you very pleasant, safe trip home, and see you next year at the 8th Belgrade Security Forum.